everyone. Welcome to Bull TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield here, reunited with the incomparable Clay Aiken.
Is that how you say that word?
Good morning.
Incomparable?
Incomparable.
I say incomparable.
Incomparable.
I mean, I don't say that about myself, let's be honest, but I just pronounce that a different way.
That was amazing.
I don't say that about
Incomparable Clay Aiken.
I don't say that about myself. I mean, I probably am, but not in a good way. Anyway, good to be back. I'm back for a very special day, right?
It is. We are celebrating our 1-year anniversary, and we've got a special surprise. So all you Claymates, I know you're jumping up and down off your couches right now because Clay's back, but stay to the end of the show because we've got a couple little surprises. So Clay,
I'm not familiar with those either.
you.
Well, thank you. Quite the summer. I spent most of the summer in North Carolina this year. I don't usually do that, but I was gone for quite a while. So it's nice to be back. New York has welcomed me with delayed subways and stank open arms.
Yep.
Yes. So, but it's good to be back.
Yeah.
So you had a nice summer here.
We did. We were busy. Just as
Bull
you know,
business is taking off on Tuesdays.
David Grasso and the whole Bull business team are doing fantastic work. We've had some great guests. We're getting lawmakers going on there to talk about regulatory issues, which is nice little crossover. But I think the more interesting thing is all the entrepreneurs we're getting on Bull Business. So if you're not checking out Bull Business, make sure on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. But you were also
watch it on Facebook.
That's right, and Periscope.
Just like you should be watching us now, sharing us, etc.
That's right, and making sure that you like Bull TV on your Facebook if you don't like Bull TV already, and make sure that you also share this episode with your friends because that helps us grow.
And comment. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us questions that you might have. For guests, we tend to use those a lot because I'm not very good at coming up with them on my own. So feel free to help us out.
We have. I just think it's our brain trust. Like we have some really smart viewers. It's you guys help make this show possible. So we are very happy that you've been with us for this whole year ride for our anniversary. Happy anniversary, Clay.
Happy anniversary to you.
And you were at Politicon this summer too.
I was. Have I not been here since I did that?
No.
Yes, I was at Politicon. It was interesting as always. You know, one of my very good friends started it.
Yes.
She actually was the person who was with me from the moment I left. Actually, before Idol was over, she was kind of my, we won't say handler, but she was she was the person I say who taught me how to be famous.
The Clay Whisperer.
Yeah, I don't know how well she did on that, but she started Politicon, so I do that every year, and it has grown into something really enormous, very, very big. This year I did some panels on LGBT issues, some panels on President Trump, specifically, since I have a little bit of different insight into him than a lot of people do since I did the show.
Yep.
It was fun as always. It's a huge thing. Next year we should take the show and do it from there.
Oh, I would love to.
Done.
I think yep, we'll see you guys there. And good morning, Maria Lucia. The incomparable is perfect. Yes.
We're going to work on how to say that word.
Incomparable.
She's watching from Brazil. Thank you very much.
And Rondalie Deschamps. Hello, Carrie and Clay. Hello, Rondalie.
So we can't possibly go over all that has happened this past summer since I've been gone, but maybe just try to tackle the week because it seems like every week is.
It's a whole other saga.
How do you feel about our security in the world nowadays?
Well, it's just so much, and I know that Trump just said before a gathering of military leaders, this is breaking overnight. I think we've got the headline for that to show you guys, but he basically said maybe it's the calm before the storm while he was standing next to some military leaders, and the journalist said, "Well, what is it? What is the calm? What's the storm?" And he said, "You'll find out."
What do you think it means?
Well, I think it's two things you have to separate. I think part of it is his obsession with theatrics. He talks. I mean, you know this.
No. That's kind of where I was going to go, but I was wondering if that's what you thought also.
Yeah.
I don't think he knows.
I don't think he does either. I think he's a master of improv, and when it comes to foreign policy, that can be disconcerting, but at the same time, it's flexible. So.
Or he's not a master of improv, and that was the thought that came to his head, so he said it, and it doesn't make any sense. Although there are some people who I think are thinking that it may mean, it may be his alluding to the fact that he is rumored to be planning on decertifying the Iran nuclear deal in the next several days, which is another headline that's been in the news this week. He said that he's going to say that it's not in the national interest. Now, whether or not that means he's going to actually pull out from it, I don't think anyone really knows yet, do they?
Well, and it's interesting because General Mattis was on Capitol Hill saying, I think that we should maybe keep it in place. So this could be an instance where he's not listening to his generals. But on the campaign, he was very much, I think his reflex was to say the deal is a bad thing. So this could be one of these instances where he would be overruling his generals when just this past year, most people have said, well, even if he's too out there, at least he listens to his generals.
Right, but have there not been a whole bunch of different examples of him not listening to not just his generals, but I mean, how about this week and Secretary Tillerson, who he has come out and spoken pretty much undercut several times this week when it came to North Korea. I believe Secretary Tillerson has said that he didn't believe that pulling out of the Iran deal was necessarily the right thing to do. Is Donald Trump running the country based on what he made, the promises he made during the campaign? Is he running it based on what he believes is going to get the biggest cheers at his rallies, and therefore not listening to these generals? I mean, what do you think is guiding his decision to want to pull out of the Iran deal, or to want to say to North Korea, make these threats over Twitter to North Korea?
Well, I think that, like I said, his reflex, and I know he listens a lot to Senator Tom Cotton, who is very, very much against the nuclear deal, and that's one of his key allies on Capitol Hill. And I think he's been listening to him a lot, and he listened to him throughout the campaign too. I personally actually agree, and Ted Cruz has been very critical of the nuclear deal. I actually agree that the deal, because when you saw it happened, the people of Iran were cheering in the streets. Because I feel like we didn't really get much in return.
Right.
That was my sense.
Right, and I think a lot of people shared that, and I think the alternative argument on the other side, and my argument when it was happening was, it was sort of that situation where, so what's the alternative? Nothing, right? And the alternative, if you got three paths to go down, one being do nothing whatsoever and have no relationship with Iran, let them continue to develop nuclear weapons. Option letter Z, hopefully, would be to get into some sort of armed conflict with them, which we don't want, we don't need, or something somewhere in the middle where, yeah, we don't get everything we want, but at least there's a dialogue going on. I think that's probably why a lot of people don't want to pull out of it.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I think the concern, though, is that we had these very strong sanctions against them because it's, in my opinion, it's not just the nuclear deal that's here the issue, because there's a lot of terrorism. Like, that's something that Trump has said, that Iran is the #1 exporter of terrorism because the Iranians, they fund Hezbollah, they fund Hamas, they fund the Houthis in Yemen. So these guys are expert at just, sharing their terrorism with the world. And because we had these strict sanctions against them, they were actually facing some trouble doing that. And I think that Senator Cotton and Ted Cruz, they are upset because they felt like we were basically withdrawing the sanctions and not getting anything in return, especially on the broader war on terror.
Well, I mean, listen, as with probably everything that happens in Washington, from the Iran deal to even admittedly healthcare, what's been done thus far and what's in place is rarely ever perfect for anyone. And I think, as I feel with healthcare, God help us, let's go down that rabbit hole right now, but as I feel with healthcare, sometimes I believe the better strategy is to take what we've got and try to fix what's there versus pulling out of the Paris climate deal, instead of going in and saying, here's what we're willing to do, here's what we're not willing to do, we want to make a change. For someone who prides himself on being this incredible deal maker who says that he makes the best deals in the world, I'm not convinced that just canceling a deal is superior to going in, and if you are a great deal maker, going in and changing it and modifying it and negotiating a better deal versus no deal at all.
True. But let me ask you this, because I think the Iranian deal actually might not be legally sound because the president does not have the right to sign a treaty. And if it smells like a treaty, if whatever, that quack duck thing, it seems like, in my opinion, this Iranian deal, I don't even know if President Obama had the jurisdiction to do it. And the same thing with DACA, and also the same thing with the Paris Climate Accord. So it seemed, in my opinion, that a lot of what was happening was these policies were being put in place, without consent of Congress, when constitutionally, and so I think that's why a lot of people felt really upset. Like they felt like the people were not being consulted. And so when Trump is rolling back a lot of these things, some would say, well, actually, this is just moving us back to the state of being where it's actually normal and it's more constitutional.
Right. Well, I think you could argue also that if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it very well may be in a costume, you know? and I think that was sort of the situation with the Paris climate deal, with DACA. Were they treaties that normally should have been ratified or laws that should have been put in place by Congress? Arguably, yes. But does the President of the United States have the authority to determine how his administrative executive branch enacts the laws, how they operate, and certainly the President of the United States has the authority to tell the Department of Homeland Security it is not a priority. It is in fact completely not a priority to deport people who are this age. So you know. If he had implemented some law that said no longer are these people breaking the law, they are here permanently, legally, then yeah, you'd be right. But I think that what President Obama did there, what he did with the Iran deal, what he did with the Paris climate deal was, yeah, milky in the sense that it sort of skirted, came as close to being
like your hair.
Yeah, right. That's
if you love his hair, let us know, because I love his milky hair. Or I think it's more like silver.
Okay, yeah.
Silver fox.
It's all. Who knows? It's a mess. I've not seen my real hair color in a long time. This is probably the closest. But there's certainly a nuance to some of this stuff, and I think that George W. Bush governed in nuance, not always the nuance I liked. Ronald Reagan did in nuance. Most every president governs with some sort of nuance. I think that's the thing that probably scares me the most, and maybe even you and a lot of Republicans the most about Donald Trump, is there's not really much nuance going on. It's just black and white, all or nothing. And that's not, especially when it comes to Iran, North Korea, and foreign policy, that's not really necessarily how we stay safe. God help us.
Well, yeah, I think that a lot of, actually, I'm going to get your thoughts on this, Clay, because you know Trump, you worked with him. When Trump would, so right now it seems like we were talking all the drama, the theatrics, where he says, you know, it's almost like WWF wrestling, you know, like let's do this, you know, precursor. They're all yelling at each other. They're throwing chairs at each other. Like, we know that it's not really real. It's all theatrics. Like, did you see a lot when you were on Celebrity Apprentice with Trump where they were planning to do something and he would just go out there and be a front man and kind of bluster around it, and it wasn't really going to happen, and he was just doing it because he wanted to get ratings?
Well, that's all he did was be a front man. I mean, Donald Trump's not, I've said before, he didn't make the decisions about who got fired on the show. He didn't necessarily, I mean, he showed up, he read the script, he showed up at the boardroom, found out who's been in a fight, and kind of egged that on. He is a showman. He always has been a showman. One thing that I will say, and when you say I know Donald Trump, I think at this point the whole country sort of understands him as much as anybody who was on the show would have understood him. We've been around him, been with him long enough. One of the things that I think I remember from the show being very incredibly memorable about him when we were on the show, that has certainly translated and continued with him here, is that he always he loves to trust his gut. He believes he's got the best instincts on the planet, and as we have seen, he makes a quick decision. And even if maybe in his private moments, you know, at home, he questions them, he's never going to question them publicly. He's never going to say that he did something wrong. So he'll make a decision and he will stick with it. And I think that can be what's dangerous, because his responses tend to be visceral, whether they're motivated because he wants to please his base, whether they're motivated because he wants to look tough and strong, whether they're motivated because he wants to entertain people. He has a visceral reaction. He gives that visceral reaction via Twitter or wherever, and then he doesn't back down from it. And I think, you know, he sometimes finds himself in places where he has gotten himself into a situation he really can't get out of. You know, he made threats sort of towards Kim Jong-un when it came to North Korea. He can't back down now very easily because he's got to have this strong look to him.
We had someone, and you guys know if you've been watching our Ben Franklin Virtue Circles with 90 Second Why, which we'll get into later, one of our virtues, but we had a virtue on the issue of humility. And Alexander DeSantis from National Review was on and talking about Trump, and we asked her, because she's not a big Trump fan really at all. I shouldn't even use the word fan, but she's a Trump observer.
Yes,
and I said, is there an instance when Trump had humility? And she said, well, actually, on Afghanistan, yeah, because on the campaign trail, his visceral, gut response was like, pull out immediately. And then he listened to and he said this in his address on Afghanistan. He listened to his generals, and then he pivoted. So we know it's possible. It's just not very common. So
it is. So he scares me with foreign policy, and we have a world to be worried about when it comes to foreign threats. But this week we've seen also domestic threats, which I think have got to be addressed in some way. Obviously, the situation in Las Vegas, which has certainly gotten everyone's hearts sort of broken this week. This tragedy in Las Vegas earlier in the week. Donald Trump did go to Las Vegas Wednesday, I believe, and made some relatively presidential comments when it came to sharing his distaste, obviously, for what happened. His some, I guess, compassion could be a word. He certainly displayed some empathy. The question now really is whether or not that empathy that everyone feels ever gets translated into any sort of policy changes. And, maybe someone's going to be able to argue that this time there's been some movement on bump stocks and trying to regulate certain weapons, certain firearms, or at least accessories for firearms. But, there is an ongoing question about whether or not we're going to be able to make any progress on keeping our citizens safe within the U.S. in the wake of this.
Well, yeah, and I think this certainly opened the conversation because this was the most deadly shooting in American history, mass shooting. So our thoughts and our hearts are definitely with you all in Vegas and Vegas strong. But, we want to bring in our first expert here, John Haltiwanger. He's the breaking news editor for Newsweek. Thanks for being here, John.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, John, you've been writing about this for Newsweek. What are the biggest takeaways here, coming a week out?
Well, of course, there was the immediate reaction from everyone, regardless of where you stand on this debate, this is devastating. You wake up and I think everyone's thinking more or less, not again. How many times are we going to see this happen? I think it doesn't matter where you stand on the gun debate. It sucks to wake up to this news. But then, of course, there's the immediate debate that begins following this. After the 5 to 10 minutes of sympathy, people are saying, well, is anything going to change this time? And there's a debate over whether it's appropriate to politicize the issue immediately after. Is it insensitive to the victims? Some would say, yes, let's wait. Let's not, jump into politics immediately. Have some respect. Others would say, well, in the future, if we want to prevent anything, we need to talk about this immediately. You don't wait, 4 weeks after a hurricane to talk about hurricane relief. So I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. I think, obviously, as you just mentioned, there's been some interesting developments with bump stocks. But I think some would say that this is just the NRA giving a concession on a gun accessory, not actually semi-automatics.
Well, what's interesting, the NRA, in fact, we've got that headline that the NRA bans bump stocks at their own firing ranges. So that's, if they won't even use it themselves, and then the rationale they say is that it's causes an unevenness. It makes it less predictable when you have a bump stock on. So that's for their reason, safety reasons. They don't allow it at their own ranges.
Can you explain to us the difference between what the NRA has requested when it comes to regulating bump stocks versus some sort of legislative move to ban them? Because they have not necessarily suggested that Congress ban this accessory, correct?
I believe that's correct. From what I've seen so far, there's several Republicans in Congress who have written a letter to ATF asking them to review the legislation surrounding bump stocks, because I think the reason they were allowed is because they were considered a gun accessory and not, because technically they make a gun, an automatic gun, and automatic weapons have been banned since 1986. So I believe the reason they were allowed is because they were considered a gun accessory rather than a gun itself, and they're asking the ATF to review that. So this is still in preliminary stages. We're not really sure what's going to happen
But that would be a different move, asking ATF to review already existing law and perhaps ATF making a decision. Okay, these aren't allowed based under the laws that we already have in place, versus Congress actually taking action, which I think some Republicans have said, even Republicans bipartisan have said they would like to actually make a move to ban these things. Now, if I'm the NRA president, or if I'm the NRA in general, why would it make a difference to me whether or not ATF handled this versus whether Congress passed a law?
Well, I think that's something you have to ask the NRA. I can't speak for the NRA. I personally believe that they're making this move in order to move the conversation away from, moving back towards, well, I know people take issue with the phrase assault weapons and how it's misconstrued, but with the assault weapons ban that was in place from 94 to 2004, I think they want to move the conversation away from such bans and not talk about, okay, why can people have assault-style semi-automatics that you can have high-capacity magazines with that allow such tragedies to happen?
So, John, I want to put one of your headlines for one of your pieces in Newsweek. Sure. You did some reporting on the shooting, and you report that the Las Vegas shooting recovery will cost at least $600 million.
Yeah.
So can you talk, that figure I think is very interesting, because the purpose of government, is ensuring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when you have such a high price tag, because in some ways, it's obviously this is, a question of the Second Amendment being protected, because that's also in our founding documents too, to make sure that, the right of the peoples to bear arms shall not be infringed. So how that $600 million figure, how can we reconcile these two tensions right now? Because clearly government is meant to protect property, and then when you have someone who is asserting his Second Amendment rights, who is harming someone else's property, what's the compromise for this?
That's a very good question. I think it's a question that we need to ask Congress. This is not just taking a physical toll on people, it's taking an emotional toll. The expert I spoke with was saying a lot of the victims who weren't even shot will be dealing with PTSD for years. And I think as a country, we have to ask ourselves, why have we given such an arguably imbalanced response to something like terrorism, where, for example, roughly 3,000 people died on 9/11, which is obviously a terrible tragedy. But this year alone, we've seen around 12,000 people die from gun violence. So that's roughly 4 9/11s, and the year's not even over yet. What did we do after 9/11? In less than a month, we invaded Afghanistan. We tortured people. We surveilled our own citizens.
New rules at airline. Everything in and out of our lives changed.
And not just for us, but for the entire world. We changed the entire world's travel regulations for us because of one terror attack, which was terrible, obviously.
But is the response to that, though, that the terror attack had a much bigger impact in terms of the trillions of dollars lost in productivity, the disruption to the financial system, the evaporation of confidence in the market? So it was a much bigger ripple effect than, a Crip shooting of blood, which is terrible. And we need to stop that, cradle to prison pipeline. We need to do so much more on that. But when you're talking about, someone, an innocent person who went to work, being murdered versus, people who are committing violent crimes.
But a lot of people are being murdered at work by their coworkers with guns. This has happened recently at a post office. I think it was in Nevada. Actually, it was in Nevada. This is happening way too frequently. And since 9/11, just 95 Americans, I shouldn't say just, because every life that is lost from terrorism is tragic, but 95 Americans have died since 9/11. Last year alone, 15,000 died from gun violence, and that doesn't even count for suicides. So why are we not, I'm just saying in terms of the policy response, why do we have this overblown response, arguably, to terrorism, but we've done barely anything on gun violence? 20 children die, Congress does nothing. One of their own gets shot in Alexandria earlier this summer, they do nothing. What will it take for them to actually take substantive action on gun control?
Let's pull in a couple of commenters real fast, Clay, and then Connie Chang says, make bullets hella expensive.
Tax on
Clay
likes
that.
I think it's funny.
And Brenda Flower says that a 1776 musket is not the same as an AK-47.
That's true. I mean, the arguments that I hear from the gun rights side. I mean, I hate to say the gun rights side because
the Second Amendment rights. How about that?
No, because I
Second Amendment supporting side.
Because I support the Second Amendment also.
As do I. As do I.
I interpret it, I think, a little bit differently than some folks do.
Exactly.
In the sense, but a lot of the arguments that I hear from those who staunchly support complete and utter freedom when it comes to all types of gun ownership and use, Some of them sort of fell apart a little bit this week, I noticed in Vegas, because that argument that if more people had guns, you'd be able to prevent these things. There was an artist who was a part of the concert, a country
So
musician.
Dan Bilzerian, the Instagram star, he actually filmed himself live saying, "I'm going to grab a gun and go back," and then 5 minutes later he goes, "Well, there's not much I can do, so I guess I should leave."
Right. And there were artists. There was an artist who actually said, a country star who said that he was a big hunter, has always been a supporter of the Second Amendment. But the truth is, that type of situation, someone with a gun would not have been able to stop. I think even people would argue that the Pulse nightclub shooting, had someone had a gun in that situation, in the dark, in the smoky environment, they probably wouldn't have been able to stop anything.
Yeah.
My question is, have there been signs? I mean, it's hard for the numbers in the polls of American people to actually go up any higher. I think the number of people who support increased background checks is in the 90s.
It's bipartisan support for these things, yeah.
Have we seen any movement at all since Vegas continued in the direction of trying to regulate gun ownership or gun purchases beyond just bump stocks?
I haven't seen any new polls. I'm guessing they are gathering that data, but it is true. You make a great point that Republicans and Democrats, and I'm not talking about people in Congress, I'm talking about voters, they support things like universal background checks. Why aren't their elected representatives listening to their constituents? Why aren't they considering these things? And I think you make a great point about the good guy with the gun argument. You know who found the shooter? An unarmed security guard. He was the guy who found the shooter. He didn't have a gun, and he helped save lives. And studies show that guns are rarely used in self-defense, and they're rarely used to prevent crimes. And experts would say, if you have a gun, probably the best thing to do in an active shooter situation is to not whip it out, because you're going to become a target for law enforcement, and you also might hit other people. So
good point. I didn't think about that, but I do think I read someone say that with regard to the Vegas shooting, that they didn't want to pull their gun out because they were afraid the police would think that they were.
In that pandemonium, how are they going to know that you're not part of the situation?
No, these are all logistical issues that, well, in terms of the Second Amendment, I mean, it's crystal clear that people have the right to bear arms, but obviously that comes in conflict with the right to life as well. So this is something that we're going to keep looking at. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, John, from
Thank you.
Newsweek. Come back again.
It's. I guess there's also there's confusion, or maybe there's just crazy debate over the other parts of the Second Amendment, because it does say a right to bear arms, but of course there's that section that says in order to maintain a militia, et cetera, there are commas in places that nobody necessarily understands why they're there. One of the funniest arguments to me, though, Rand Paul is someone who constantly says one of the reasons for the Second Amendment is to make sure that the people never have to worry about a tyrannical government. And I think to myself, we spend billions of dollars every year on the military in the U.S., the tanks, the amount of money, the amount of weaponry the U.S. has now. If the people wanted to rise up against the U.S. government, how many guns do you think they'd have to buy in order to be able to beat the U.S. military at this point? It sort of negates that argument.
I think we can ask our military expert, although that's not what she's here to talk about.
You're a military expert, too.
She's a Renaissance woman.
Everything. I know, that's right. I wasn't being sarcastic.
I like the hair, by the way.
Thank you. I was going to say the thing about yours. Yours is short since
I copied Carrie's look, but then she grew out her hair.
I'm about to cut it, so.
Oh, good.
We'll
be
go
twinsies
inside.
We're going
again.
to do it on the show next week.
So, happy anniversary, guys.
Yeah.
Very much. Morgan
really
Ortagus is
excited.
here.
Morgan Ortagus.
Thank you.
Yes.
I feel very honored to be here on the 1 year anniversary.
We are happy to have you.
Thank you.
And in one of your many hats, you were a Treasury official, and so you're here to talk about tax reform.
I am. What a fascinating subject. Don't turn off Facebook. Keep watching. It'll be interesting. I promise.
This is something that the Republican Party and the president have certainly talked about. The president talked about it extensively, and I think he would argue, and maybe even people would sort of believe, that this is an area where he might have some sort of knowledge. Not saying that he doesn't have knowledge everywhere, but he certainly knows a lot about taxes because he's been paying them for a while. Yet, is this something that they're going to be able to pass?
Well, they have to. I mean, they literally have no choice. I don't know how the Republicans would go before the American people in 2018 and without a major legislative accomplishment and say, please reelect us. You know, the Republicans have the White House, they have the House, they have the Senate. I mean, they're literally, if they can't get tax reform done, then listen, I'm a Republican. I would feel no compelling reason to vote them back in if they can't get this done. So I think it's a do or die moment, but it's very doable for them. I actually think that this should be their shining moment. You talked about this being something that the president's focusing on, but also Steve Mnuchin, who's the Treasury Secretary, and Gary Kahn have been incredibly focused on this. And although it sounds like a Republican issue, keep in mind that Barack Obama floated in 2012 a corporate tax cut. There's been a lot of talk about repatriation. And the interesting thing is, when this tax plan first came out, first got floated, the Democrats did their normal talking points, tax cuts for the rich, blah, blah, blah. But the most interesting thing happened is that the people that are really conservative, like Rush Limbaugh, came out and said, wait a minute, this isn't a conservative tax plan. This is a populist tax plan. And you had some of the people who, that are very big in the populist movement that lauded this because they said, actually, this, while it is giving a corporate tax cut, which is important to stimulate growth, it's taking the small business cap down to 25%. And when you look at the new rates, so there should be 3 new rates, right? There's 7 rates now. The proposal is, and this is still a proposal, everything's still negotiation, to have 3 rates, potentially 4. What they're looking to do is there's an element of society that pays 0 taxes. So with and please don't turn to Facebook, this is going to be interesting, I promise. So with the standard deduction, with doubling that up to $12,000, $24,000 for couples, you're looking at actually expanding the base of people that pay 0 taxes. And I think that this administration is actually working very hard to deliver on some of the populist themes that the president would like to deliver on, to see real middle-class tax relief. So one way that the 3 of us are going to get hit, I mean, I'm a New York City resident, I assume you two are. So right now, we are able to deduct our state and local taxes from our federal taxes. And one of the ways in which that they're talking about trying to, when you hear people saying revenue neutral or pay for these tax cuts, is to eliminate the deduction that we have.
They've gotten a lot of pushback for that, though. They actually, I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a front page story about this where they were like, yeah, we want to do this. And they're like, no, just kidding. We're not going to.
Well, the Wall Street Journal writers all live in New York, so that's probably why they got a problem with it. I mean, but even that has not been able to convince a lot of people that this would still be revenue neutral. And
no, that's true. That would be about $1 trillion, roughly.
And who are the folks who are going to be the problem for them? Because certainly there are going to be a lot of Democrats who vote against it. Arguably, there might be some who would support this particular tax plan.
Maybe you might see Manchin or some of the others.
Heidi perhaps.
Exactly.
But there's
everybody up for re-election in 2018.
Debbie Stabenow probably ain't going to mess with it. But regardless, you've got some Republicans who are not thrilled with it too. Is that correct?
So, everything is still a negotiation. And the one thing that I think that we've all learned from this president is even, up until the moment that it comes out of his mouth as an official announcement, it's up for negotiation. So on the Republican side, what had to happen, which happened yesterday in a Senate committee, has already passed in the House, is a FY18, fiscal year to 18 budget resolution. And that will give the reconciliation language required.
Sure, it already paved the way, essentially. I think we have a headline on that.
It still has to go through the Senate, actually.
Yes,
So once
it certainly is the blueprint for.
It's the blueprint. It's what we had for healthcare, but we couldn't get it over the line with the 50 votes, unfortunately. So it looks like what we generally refer to as the Tea Party members of Congress and even of the Senate. It looks like they're on board for the tax ban. So I don't think that you're going to see a revolt from them. You have seen Ted Cruz and Rand Paul say that they'd like to see dynamic scoring. Everybody's on board on the Republican side for dynamic scoring, but they want to see these tax cuts paid for in 10 years, which I think that they can figure out the math on that. You do have Corker, the senator from Tennessee, who announced that he's not running for re-election. So I think that will certainly
got nothing to lose now.
He's got nothing to lose. He said that he's not going to vote for anything that adds a dime to the deficit. Now, that's, Republicans inherently believe that when you cut taxes, it might add short-term to the deficit, but that it will increase growth at such a rate that you're going to make that up. Democrats believe the opposite.
I don't know that I agree with that. I would say that a lot of Democrats believe that adding to the deficit is an investment in the future. It's just a matter of
do it with government spending.
It's just a matter of how you make that investment.
But the one thing that I think is going to be different, this is not going to be, what I'm seeing so far is this isn't going to be a version of the Bush tax cuts. I mean, what the White House, the information that the White House and the Treasury are putting out is they want most Americans to be able to file their taxes on one page. They want most Americans not to have to worry about keeping receipts and keeping all of the paperwork. They really want to simplify the process, make it simple, make it fair. So what does that mean for the higher income people? That does mean a lot of eliminations of deductions that many of us take advantage of, you know, myself included. So,
But Morgan, does the plan actually outline any of this? We have a commenter here, Joanne Lopez says, why haven't we seen any of these tax reform percentage proposals so we can actually know what we are talking about? I think that's one of the questions is, you know, how much detail do we have? I mean, I'm very supportive. I'm a big fan of tax reform, and I think what's been laid out is a great just, you know, way to start thinking about this. But as always, the devil is in the details. So when you say we want it on a postage stamp or on a you know, one sheet of paper for my taxes,
Yeah.
I would love that too. But number one, how can we do something so complex in such a simple way? And then number two, how can we make sure that that's protected? Because you know what's going to happen is that these lobbyists are going to come up and load these bills up like a Christmas tree in the future and get all kinds of other government giveaways.
yeah, you're absolutely right. So when it comes to what is the administration put out, I think what the administration has put out publicly for the 3 tax brackets, getting the corporate rate down to 20%, moving to a territorial tax system, which means there's so many businesses that offshore that put manufacturing facilities overseas. We want to encourage people to bring those back, and we don't right now. They're not incentivized to do it. They're penalized. We want to try to fix a lot of those problems. So I think what you've seen out of the administration is what they've said publicly is here's a vision of what we want to do. And the details right now are being negotiated in the House, in the Senate, on what the specifics of the plan will be. So I think that the administration actually has done a good job, much better than on healthcare. I think Steve Mnuchin has done a good job of laying out here's the vision. And so I don't know, I guess maybe I disagree a little bit with the viewer. Thank you for watching. But I do think that they have laid out a pretty bold plan. What do you want to see? You want all 50 pages online?
Well,
or-
one of the things that we still don't have, we don't have to my knowledge, and I'll admit I'm, you know, the finance thing is yours. But we don't have a CBO score of it yet. One of the reasons I
it's
would
not
argue,
finished
one
yet,
of the
yeah.
reasons that I would argue that people are asking for dynamic scoring is because they are concerned that the normal way that the CBO score stuff
That's right.
won't look good for them.
Sure.
Arguably, maybe dynamic scoring, we've talked about this before.
Yep.
Some people think it's rigging the system to make it look better for, my question is,
And we know
Democrats-
how accurate the CBO is.
well, tell you
This
whether
is
or
a
not
very good point.
whether they're
And
not
we
they're
had
accurate.
the
Rabbit
former
hole.
CBO director
Rabbit
to
hole.
talk about
Rabbit
it.
hole.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Whether or not
You're right, Clay.
it's accurate or not, it certainly is something that both the public and certain senators rely on. And so when the CBO score comes out, arguably, although I agree that there are parts of it in isolation that progressives would support. There are parts of it in isolation that I think are a good idea. Democrats, that said, don't really have any incentive whatsoever to give the president a win, to give Republicans a win. Now, that's not the way to do government, if you ask me, but it's certainly the way we do government. And so if
True.
the CBO comes out and is unable to satisfy some of those moderate Republicans like Susan Collins, like Lisa Murkowski, those folks who've been a problem for you already, and also at the same time is not able to satisfy folks like Bob Corker and maybe some of the more far-right folks who are deficit hawks. How does this pass if Democrats stick together? I mean, because Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, even though they're up for re-election, if they see that there are going to be Republican defections enough to keep this from passing, I don't see them crossing the aisle and helping Republicans pass something that they can't pass on their own.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think that's why it's still a negotiation. And I think the president has shown over the past month that he's going to be willing to negotiate with Democrats if necessary. We keep talking about they need 50 votes. They do need 50 votes. It's not necessarily 50 Republican votes. I'm sure they're going to attempt to get 50 Republican votes and to try to pick off some Democrats. And this is where I think that the administration needs to keep selling what they're trying to do for middle class tax relief and what they're trying to do to help businesses. There was a poll that Fox Business put out, I think it was yesterday, that said that around, I think the statistic was around 64% of manufacturers said if this tax reform goes into effect the way that they're talking about it, 64% said that they would have increased investments over the next, because one of the proposals is that 100% of your capital expenditures for the next 5 years would not be taxed. There'd be a tax haven on that. So what does that mean? That means any sort of big manufacturing, big equipment investments that you need to do, not taxed for 5 years.
Well, we certainly need that because
and 57% said they were going to hire. So that
I don't know why you think
need.
people, I don't know why you think people are going to be bored with you. You're very good at this, even though I think you're wrong on so much stuff. You're very
tax reform
entertaining.
sexy.
You're very good. It's always nice to have you there. And sometimes I listen to Morgan and I think, oh God, you're dangerous because you might sometimes I start going, oh, well, that makes sense, even though it doesn't at all. But
it does.
It does.
She's making tax reform sexy.
You do
again.
make it.
Yeah.
You do make it sexy, and
You know
you
what
make
my
it appealing.
dream is, Kelly? On one of these shows, you and I just have to have like a shot of tequila and sing a duet together.
Well, it's going to take. It'll be
Right?
easier for you to get me to sing than it'll be for you to get me to drink anything. But you know what? Tell you, keep coming back, and eventually, maybe you'll ease me into it.
Eventually. This will be must-see TV, Clay.
Yes, well, Morgan Ortagus, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Hey, and happy anniversary.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Morgan.
It is, I get worried when I get into conversations with you about money stuff, but this is one of those things where I just don't see any Democrat, no matter how moderate, being that vote. If you're down to 49 Republicans who are willing to vote for this, there's not going to be a Democrat, no matter how vulnerable they are in a general election, who I think is going to be willing to step over and be the Democrat who made something pass for Donald Trump, even if it is Joe Manchin or Heidi Heitkamp. It's just, it'd be death for them in a primary. This country's so divided.
Well, there are, I believe, 9, or is it 10 senators who are Democrats who won in Trump-led states. So
Right.
I
Well,
think there are some other areas.
And most of
Yeah.
those states are not states, or several of those states are not states where the president's poll numbers are healthy enough to necessarily be a help for them.
I
So-
have this theory on Trump polling where approve, disapprove are it's too binary. Like there
don't
should be
disagree.
another third option or multiple options and
Appro-
say,
approve,
do
disapprove,
you want
or
him
think-
or someone else?
Right. Well, or, there are a lot of people who don't approve of
The
him as a
alternative.
president, but don't mind his policies.
Right, exactly, yes.
They like his policies or believe they like his policies,
Yeah.
but they wish he'd put the Twitter down and they think he's going to get us in a nuclear war.
think
and
there are
that's
a lot-
problem,
I
you
think
know.
there are a lot of people
So
who
it will be interesting, but I think, I do think that, talk about a razor's edge, and it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be nail-biting TV again to watch a vote on something like that, because unless they get every single they've got to win it with Republicans. I just don't see how you win it with Republicans defecting and then have enough Democrats who are willing to help it out. But
Well, I hope Mitch McConnell can do his job. Please, please,
Now
Mitch
with
McConnell, please, you can do this. You can do this.
you sound like
Yes.
Roy. You sound like Roy Moore. Don't be one of those,
Oh,
Carrie.
no. No, actually, he would be saying the opposite. He would be trying to take his job. But at any rate, let's move on. For those of you who've been following the last several weeks, we've been doing an initiative called the Ben Franklin Circle segment. As you know, this is a nationwide initiative led by the 92nd Street Y, the Hoover Institution, and Citizen University. It's based on Ben Franklin's own club, where he and his peers discussed what it means to be a good person.
We need that. We're focusing. I don't know if you chose this particular topic because I was coming back. I feel like I'm pretty clean. But we're talking today about the virtue of cleanliness. Ben Franklin said, tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. What are you trying to say to me right now, Carrie?
Clay, we're almost done. We only have one more virtue left, actually.
So you saved the two that you thought that I needed to hear about? We're happy to welcome our two guests to expand on this discussion and tell me how much I smell. Brandon Muir, the Executive Director of Reclaim New York, and Felipe Vargas, who's the Vice President of Programs from the Doe Fund. Thank you very much both for being here. You both look very clean today.
Try our best. Try our best.
Well, and I'm glad that you guys are here because we wanted to take it to the public policy arena in terms of what's happening in New York. So, what's happening with the Doe Fund. We've had you guys on before. Tell us, why is cleanliness so important to what the Doe Fund does?
Cleanliness is important because we serve formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated men, and we clean over 150 miles of street on a daily basis, and we do it to provide the men that we serve with an opportunity to engage in paid transitional work. And we offer them educational programs and occupational training. We then offer them life skills, job preparation, we place them in jobs, and we place them in housing. So cleanliness for us is important because it gives the men that we serve an opportunity to earn a living and to be able to be placed in employment.
And Brandon, tell us about Reclaim New York and what you guys are doing on the cleanliness front in terms of how you think about New York and public policy.
Sure. So the idea is that we engage with government on a daily basis, and being clean in the sense of organizing your finances and understanding where the money's going, how it's being spent. There's an empowering feeling when we understand how much we are paying to government in the form of taxes and fees and whatnot. And the more we can make that easy for New Yorkers to see that money going out and really think about the value they get from government, they're in a stronger position to engage productively and create the New York that they want.
Cool. Well, and so in terms of cleanliness, because you guys haven't been on any of the episodes yet, but the intention for what the 92nd Street Y did with this is that they wanted to bring back, these founding virtues, because virtue is a word that nobody talks about anymore, but it used to be very common when our founding fathers were setting up this Constitution. That's the longest running Constitution in human history. It's amazing. But, in terms of the word virtue and the word cleanliness, why is that important for the people in the Doe Fund?
Cleanliness is important for the people in the Doe Fund, as I spoke before, because of the opportunity to work.
Right, but
I
I guess I'm speaking about the work that they're doing to clean
Right.
the city.
It's
Because I
also-
know for a lot of them, they're coming from a background, of maybe a criminal background or a homeless background where they didn't have a lot of order or cleanliness.
Absolutely.
And so for them,
Absolutely.
what I've been told is that they were terrorizing the streets, and they were, putting blood in the streets, or
Many of them
they
were.
were making the streets not a safe or clean place.
Absolutely.
So talk about that transformation.
So now they're contributing to their communities. They're providing meaningful work. And that is also one of our goals, that the work that the men engage in is meaningful work that provides a real service to the community rather than busy work. So that opportunity for the men to be able to do that is transformative. They feel very good about themselves to be able to go back in the community and do something constructive rather than what they were doing before, which was destructive.
And there's certainly a degree of ownership, I imagine, that people
Absolutely.
take in an area when they're, this is my first time being back. I've been gone this summer, so I haven't been a part of the virtues thing. But to me, each of the virtues that have been talked about on the show are really sort of building blocks. And cleanliness, it's a horrible example probably, but it makes me think of the broken windows policy. Not necessarily, everyone's not necessarily a fan of that policy, but the idea that starting with the basic building block of making sure that you take ownership and pride in an area and you keep it clean.
Yes.
And you keep it orderly.
Absolutely.
What types of, when you work with these men at the Doe Fund, you don't just give them jobs. You teach them about how to have a more productive and successful life.
Absolutely.
And what type of role does cleanliness, maybe not cleanliness, but certainly taking pride and ownership in themselves and their city and their lives play in helping them be more successful?
Well, our facilities are also immaculate. I don't know if you've ever visited one. I would invite you to go there. So it's our facilities. It's them cleaning the streets. It's removing graffiti. But also during that time, we're teaching them soft skills, the skills that they're going to need to obtain and maintain a job. And they take ownership of it because they're actually doing it. And one of the things that I think, one of the tangible things that come from that, many of our folks, when they were in the community, people would run away from them, be afraid of them because they were involved in a criminal lifestyle, or they were using drugs, or because they were homeless. One of the things that often happens with our guys is that people come up to them, ask them for directions, just come up to them and say, "Thank you, how's your day?" And they talk about that. They talk about how good that feels and how transformative that is for them.
Right. No, every time I see a Doe Fund worker, I think we've got some pictures of the Doe Fund workers that we've been showing, but every time I see one on the streets of New York, I always try to give them a high five or just say, I love you guys, what you guys are doing, because I know your story of where you've come. But Brandon, Clay mentioned the broken windows policing, but just in general, because I know it is, a contentious topic, but just like Clay said, the notion that the little things matter. Can you talk about that? Because I think cleanliness is really not just a one-off. It's really focusing on details.
It is, and I think the word that Clay used, which was so important, is ownership. And there's something about putting on a clean shirt, waking up in an apartment, even if it's the size of a shoebox, like here in New York, that you feel comfortable, you feel home. It's in an orderly fashion. And when we think about that in our relationship to government, We want citizens to feel empowered. We want them to feel a sense of ownership, like they can constructively engage government. And at the core of that, it means we have to understand what government costs, right? What are we paying? What are we getting back? It's a value judgment. But what makes it difficult in our relationship with government with so many different levels and so many different touch points, how do we add all that stuff up? So the more New Yorkers can feel a sense of empowerment, that they do understand how much they're paying, what they're getting back, we're going to be in a better place to engage and push New York in a good direction.
What are the projects that Reclaim New York is working on now specifically?
So one of the things we started with was an affordability calculator. What most New Yorkers don't understand is the biggest check they will cut each year will go to government between federal, state, and
Oh, no,
local.
people know that.
Okay. So what I'll tell you is maybe they just don't know how much, right? So most New Yorkers are spending 25 to 45% of their annual income on government. Now, if I told you that and you went home at the end of the day and you weren't able to say what you got back in return for that, we would be in a bad place. And unfortunately, that's where most New Yorkers are.
We pretty much can't.
There you go. So we want to empower New Yorkers by saying this is what you can see. You can go to our website and you can see exactly how much you're spending. You punch in your income, answer a couple questions. It gives you a nice little pie chart. But the point is, if citizens see that and feel empowered to become an owner of their school district, village, or town, show up to a board meeting, raise your hand, ask a question. That puts us in a place where we're participating in our democracy. And I think at 19% and 20% voter turnouts, the more we can do that across the aisle in a truly nonpartisan fashion, we're going to be in a better place.
Getting involved. It's important. We're going to talk about that in our next segment too. But
Novel idea, right?
Listen, I tried. Well, thank you guys very much. Doe Fund, the website for the Doe Fund is?
www.doe.org.
That's easy to remember.
Doe.org.
DOE.org. You can also find it on bold.global, and you can find out more
Facebook.
about Reclaim NYC at
ReclaimNewYork.org, yes. And we're on Facebook and Twitter and all the fun ones, Instagram. Come say hi.
We'll have links to those all on bold.global and anywhere you get your bold goodness. Thank you guys very much
Thank
for
you for having us
being
again.
guys.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And just as a reminder, Ben Franklin Circles are easy to start and anyone can run one, including you. We'd like to challenge you at home to be bold and start your own Ben Franklin Circle. Get a group of your friends together and pick one of the virtues to discuss.
What's our virtue next week, Carrie? Just
Oh
to-
my gosh, Clay.
Just to prep people. I know.
Clay,
I know. Go ahead.
It's chastity.
Trust me, I'm knocking it out of the park on that one.
Oh, yeah. So make sure when you do your Ben Franklin Circle, send us your pictures. And so you can email benfranklincircles. Or go to the website first. Go to benfranklincircles.org and then email benfranklincircles@gmail.com and you can sign up. So again, benfranklincircles@gmail.com to sign up. Let them know that you saw the segment here on Bold TV. Send us your pictures. We'll post them on the Bold Facebook, and we just might highlight them here on the show.
There you go. Involvement. He talked about involvement. This is a nice
Yes.
segue right back into the
Beautiful, yes.
to our next segment. Sarah's back. Did you miss me, Sarah?
I did.
Did
Oh my
you?
God.
Oh my goodness.
much.
Sarah Hill's back with Amanda Littman. She's the co-founder of Run for Something, and she is a former Hillary Clinton 2016 campaign email director.
That's right. The other emails, as I like to joke.
Hey, but I'm
Laugh or you'll
getting
cry.
people to open those emails is tough. I've been there. I'm very interested in your book. Don't Just March, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. It's a book that's sort of a guide to running for office and talks to people about why it's important to do that. Why is it important to run?
You gotta run. It is the only way to fight Trump in 2017. If you want to protect your community, protect your neighbors, make sure that your city is a sanctuary city, protect the healthcare city in your neighborhood. You got to run. You got to lead. It's not enough to complain. It's not enough to
And
post
even
on
if you
Facebook.
don't want to combat Trump, even if you want to combat something completely different, running is an arguably good way to do that.
It's
you
an
know?
incredible way to be a leader in your community. You know, win or lose, you do something really good during a campaign.
I'm familiar with the losing.
Yeah.
Hey!
Winner,
No, but you know what? I
Clay.
say that, and I think it's really interesting because you have the first chapter in the book is why to run for office. You talk about that. The second chapter in the book is why winning isn't everything, and I think it's very important that people remember that. I mean, I'm not just trying to polish a turd here. I ran for a different.
Such a good Southern
great
saying.
I,
Southern
I
saying.
believe y'all have never heard that. I ran for not just the goal of winning, but to bring some attention to an issue. For me, it was gerrymandering to some degree, and the fact that certain districts are not in play for different parties, and that therefore you end up with people who win in primaries and therefore automatically win the election, and then don't really have to do their job
Exactly right.
at all. So my ability to run, my platform, my position gave me an opportunity to kind of bring attention to someone who I did not think was doing what she needed to do. It wasn't just that I disagreed with her, but because she wasn't doing her job, she ended up beating me. But she ended up losing her primary the next time because I think people who were in her party were finally paying attention to her and looked and said, wait a second, she's not doing it right. And so she lost. Now, she lost to someone who I disagree with even more. But at least I do believe he's going and doing the work. God help us, but he's doing the work, and I think that's at least a step forward. And so to me, that's why winning is not necessarily everything, but you have reasons also.
Well, I think that's exactly right. You ran to do something, not to be something. And because you did that, your work didn't end on Election Day. It continued afterwards. That was not the end of your civic engagement, nor the end for your volunteers, your voters, your donors, and the issues you were fighting for. So when our candidates run, they're running because they care about solving a problem, and the office they're running for lets them solve it. That means that it's an incredible opportunity to bring attention to something, to engage with people, and to really hold our elected officials accountable. You can't win if you're not on the ballot in the first place, and they're not going to feel the heat if you're not pushing them.
Well, jump in whenever you want to,
Sure.
but this is my.
I know you ran. You're the only one at the table who's
some-
actually run.
To some degree,
Yeah.
but let's talk about why people don't, because we don't have time to hit all of
You
them.
are bold,
but
Clay.
we-
You ran.
we don't
You're the
have time
boldest
to-
person at this table.
We don't have time to hit all of them, but there are pages and pages of reasons people don't run, and it's not just because it's nasty as hell and impossible to get. But
Well, yeah, it's part of it. Do people have the imposter syndrome? Because your book, which just came out 2 days ago, you wrote a piece that said you didn't feel like you're an actual writer.
No.
Which to me, I was like, of course she's a writer. Of course she is. But I wanted to know, do you think a lot of people don't run because they have the imposter syndrome?
Yes.
Because they feel like they can't visualize themselves running for office.
Especially young women and young people of color. We don't see as many examples of people like us in office, which means, if you can't see it, you can't be it, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so important for people to do it anyway.
do you really think, though, I mean, not to be incendiary here, but do you really think that people sit there and think to themselves, I can't do this, when they see the president is Donald Trump? I mean, if
That's
he can
what
run
we've
for
seen.
office,
Yeah, though.
then if Kid Rock can, and I'm not just cracking on Donald
They
Trump,
have
I'm
platforms.
saying,
He had a TV show. He had the whole thing. This is like
okay, so that's my other big question here, because to me, there are lots of reasons I wouldn't run again, but a big one for a lot of people is money. I mean, really, it says, why can you actually run, chapter 4, why you can actually run for state legislature. Arguable, certainly. I have friends who are running for state legislator in their states next year right now. No matter how small your district is, if you don't have money, if you can't raise money, it's about money, you're not going to get people to pay attention
Although
or see.
Trump actually spent less than Hillary by quite a bit.
But her point is.
So in that sense, he's inspiring. Like Trump was the guerrilla warfare in terms of how much he spent versus what he got in free media.
But you can't pretend that the free media was not the reason. I mean, if Donald Trump was, if anyone else had run, look at all the different people who ran against him in the primary who had no name recognition breaking through. Donald Trump, I think, is a total outlier when it comes to money because he had just a built-in amount of name recognition. If you ran for office tomorrow, you would have to raise twice what your incumbent opponent would have in order to get people.
I guess my point in the primary though was that Jeb raised $100 million and he got far less traction than Trump did. So that's my point, to say that even if you're not, raising a lot of money, you can actually do a lot without money is what I'm saying.
So I think it's really important to remember that a presidential campaign or even a congressional campaign is not the same as a city council or school board race. 75% of school board races in the country cost $1,000 or less. 85% cost $5,000 or less. Most state house, state senate races, probably between $100,000 and $200,000 depending on where you are in the media market. City council is probably between $10,000 and $20,000 depending on where you are.
You have budgets in here too, because the girl's on it.
No, mine are
Everything. Wow.
it's in here. She's got it all in here.
I think
really
it's
good.
really important to remember that this is achievable, especially local office, even if you don't have money and even if you don't have rich friends. you just have to ask people to invest in their community, especially for local office. It's not about how much you spend, it's about how many doors you knock and how many voters you talk to. And in places where that number is 4,000, 3,000, that's doable if you're willing to work hard. It's entirely in your control, which I think makes it the most exciting.
Sarah, you're pretty strategic when you pick these books that you bring. So why this one? Are you about to run for something?
No, I'm
should.
not right now.
President
Right now, ...
Those famous last words.
This was important to you, though.
Yeah, it is important. I think it's a timely conversation, and we need to inspire others. I think you've started this. You've already inspired, I think, 2,000 people to run for
So
office.
we've got 11,000 millennials across the country who've raised their hands since Election Day to say they want to run for office.
How cool is that?
It's
I mean,
incredible.
I think that's amazing. So shining light on that, no matter what party that they're going for, the fact that they're, putting themselves out there and running, and you're helping them, and you kind of give them like a playbook to do it, at least to start on it. It's empowering.
I think so.
What are you going to run for?
I'm a little busy these days.
She's the candidate whisperer. Really, you don't need to run for something. If you're getting 11,000 people to run, then you're doing a good job. Well, I agree. I don't have to convince you
No,
that
of
I
course.
believe that
I
running for
appreciate
office is
that.
important, and I certainly appreciate the fact that you're getting people to run. And I say that even though I am on your side of the aisle, I think it's important that people do that on both sides.
I am with you
because-
right there. I mean, even if your motivation is not because you're anti-Trump, I think we need more just people who are, just sober-minded. They want to talk about virtue. They want to talk about things to make our society better. We need people who are just, in the public interest instead of just
in their own
doing it-
personal interest.
Exactly.
And I think that's
yeah.
part of the reason that we have
Yeah.
people in office now who are not doing what I think they should do on either side of the aisle. It's not necessarily because they're running because they have a passion for doing something for their community or their nation or their state. It's because they have a passion for doing something for themselves. And
Yeah.
so if
Well,
we had more people on both sides.
We got a viewer here. Melissa Pollock says we need to encourage more scientists to run for Congress. Maybe if we have more scientists, then maybe we'd have less
pollution.
anger and emotion.
That's climate change.
Because they tend to be more cerebral. They're not going to be so driven by emotion or their gut. It's more about the data and the analytics.
Fair enough.
I'm with you there,
God
Melissa.
forbid we use data. Thank you very much, Amanda and Sarah, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Check it out.
Glad you're back, Claire.
Thanks, Sarah. Oh goodness. So gosh. A year.
A
Has it really-
year.
when did we? So Bold began on November 30th.
Of 2015. So the company itself was, we had a different partner. We were in a different format. We were working more on the cable front, but the actual streaming digital show is only a year old as of September 30th. So our first live show aired on September 30th last year, and many of you were there. So thank you so much for coming on. I think we've got a little
Oh, look at
little
that.
birthday candle.
Happy birthday
to Bold.
Oh my God! If I pick a key, you
Happy
got to stick with it.
Oh,
The
sorry.
same one.
Okay,
You
all
got to
right.
do the same
All right,
key
let's
I'm
do
in.
it.
No,
Ready?
too late now.
on,
Happy
honey,
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Okay,
Happy
birthday, dear.
Bold. You just keep. I'm gonna be quiet now.
You're a musician, girl.
I know.
You should have brought your. What is it that you play?
I play the violin and the oboe.
I know. Next week, an oboe solo by Carrie Sheffield.
Actually, I sold my oboe on Craigslist, but I still do play the violin and the piano.
But you could play it if I found one.
I could actually.
Might happen, folks. Might happen.
right, you
For
ready
our
to blow
second
this?
year anniversary.
Year 2. Come back next year.
Carrie will be. Oh, we're gonna make a wish.
Ready? Oh, wish. Ready?
We'll see you. Our wish is that we'll see you next week, right here on
well,
Tuesday.
Yes, and I want to do a special shout out to Jerome Bell. He's been on our thoughts because we had our Bold birthday last year, and he's just one on our mind. So why don't you give us an update and make sure, please, all of you watching here the show, if you have it in your heart, if you have the ability, please consider giving something to Jerome. And we're putting those pictures and articles back up. What's the latest with
He's
Jerome?
doing well. He's doing well. He's out of the hospital. He is on the road to recovery. I'm excited. I'm going to get to see. Well, I've seen him already, but we'll get to see him in a few weeks at our My Foundation's annual gala fundraiser. He's going to be there just like always. So we're thrilled for his progress in his recovery, and we're obviously his family, and all of us are very thankful to the Bold viewers, to Bold itself, to Carrie for your continued efforts in keeping him him at the forefront of people's thoughts. So thank you for that. But he's doing very well, and we appreciate all of he appreciates all of your support, and I do as well. So if you're so inclined for a bold birthday gift to check out a little bit more information about Jerome and how you can help out, that would be incredible. We got a little bit of a 1-year anniversary highlight reel that I haven't seen, so I'm a little bit worried about.
But then it's going to end the show, so you won't have any time to say anything.
Though I know I should be afraid. Thank you guys very much for being with us. Come back on Tuesday for Bold Business, and we'll be back on Friday of next week right here at 10 a.m. See you then.
Bye.
Morning, Carrie.
Morning, Clay. We're sitting closer together today. We're rubbing shoulders.
Good morning and welcome to another exciting episode of Bold Business. I'm your host, David Grasso.
The most important question that Lincoln, my favorite president, pretty much, can't think of anyone I love more, who was such a fighter and a scrapper, said his defining thing was, can we save the republic? Can we govern ourselves? And that's what this is about.
To first-time entrepreneurs or millennials thinking about starting their own businesses, this is what really happens. It's not the sanitized magazine glossy cover of someone's success.
I think as women, we should know and value who we are, what our narratives are.
You know who was hit the hardest by the Great Recession? Black and Latino families who lost the majority of their ownership and buying power.
This year, you made
I came out earlier this year. I made a big announcement. I was turning 21, and I felt like I was about to be a man. And, I didn't want to live inside of or in an idea of somebody that I wasn't.
I came here on a visitor's visa when I was a little boy. We overstayed, and now I'm a U.S. Congressman. What a great American story.
Well, I literally, you know what? I did check it this morning when I
say that finding Gobi was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done, but her finding me was one of the best.
Francesco, can you do that as a fondue, like bubble pot? Can I have chocolate coming up?
Of surveys to see.
Cheers!
Okay, it's going to be a feisty show today, folks.